Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out to support the work of PACH. And a very warm welcome to our middle school students here tonight, who I know gave up athletic events, friends, homework to be with us. My name is Lisa Aristia, and I'm a member of PACH and also a teacher in the Writing and Critical Inquiry program at SUNY's University at Albany, as well as a former middle school principal. And longtime high school humanities teacher. Thank you, Niobe, for asking me to introduce Chris, as well as have this opportunity to provide a small tribute to him. Chris is a dear and longtime friend of mine from California, and he's here tonight to speak with you about his project called Question Bridge and the Art of Social Transformation. In the mid-90s, Chris created an intimate artistic process for inter- and intrasocial dialogue called Question Bridge. Today, an internationally celebrated installation about Black masculinity, Question Bridge Black Males, stands as the evolutionary result of Chris's mediated bridge. Question Bridge Black Males, which some of you may have seen or experienced when it opened at the Brooklyn Museum or the Sundance Film Festival last year, is a 5-channel video installation created by Chris and his former photography student, Hank Willis Thomas, who I believe is also a member of PACH. Mentored in the 1970s by pure photography icons Imogene Cunningham, Ansel Adams, and Wynn Bullock, Chris is a professor of photography at California College of Arts in Oakland, the former president of the San Francisco Camera Work Gallery, and former chair of Oakland's Cultural Affairs Commission under eventual Governor Jerry Brown. Chris also led the Mother Jones International Fund for Documentary Photography, and he collaborated with performance artist Suzanne Lacey in the making of Shut Up and Listen, The Roof is on Fire, which sought to make the voices of Oakland youth of color heard by the mainstream adult world as young people sat in parked cars atop a roof in the city. But all of this is what ChrisJohnson does. Who he really is can be seen and understood through his socially engaged artistic practice. This practice involves, as a part of art making, creating innovative spaces to surface internal monologues about difference. It also involves teaching and mentoring. In the 90s, when I lived and worked in the San Francisco Bay Area, it was Chris who encouraged me to be what he called a creative educator. A creative educator is someone who risks in the classroom, someone who stays close to the heart in her practice, someone who always seeks ways to find a place for the intellect, the spirit, and the heart of young people, but never, ever through traditional educational routes, and always in ways that distort and trouble and attempt to represent the tangled complexities of self, other, and difference. I think that what I've learned from Chris about teaching is that, 1, it's a socially engaged art, and it should be respected and practiced with this in mind, and 2, it should be in a constant state of unrecognizable, uncomfortable reflection and action. And this is what Question Bridge Black Males is. It's a transmedia dialogue process through which we can see all types of Black men, unlaced, unobstructed, unresolved, evident. We see them at their most human, and through them we, whoever that we may be, Black, white, queer, young, we see our own humanity. Chris's Question Bridge is very much at the heart of the work here at PACH. As a group, we have yet to define what we mean by humanity, but left unsaid, perhaps this is just what it is, a process of definition or of redefining who this we we're supposed to be is. Importantly for us, then, the process of Question Bridge relies not on what we think we are professionally. In fact, the very gentle and tender process of posing a question for someone from whom we think or feel different depends not necessarily on what we do as a scientist, activist, teacher, journalist, or executive director, but instead on what we hate, what makes us angry, what we need to grow, even if we think we're already grown, as my mama would say. And it depends on what we need to love, or what we need if we intend to live collectively in a world of love. This past summer, I asked Chris how he gets people to ask such personal and universally significant questions in Question Bridge. First, he told me, and I bet you don't even remember this, first he told me that as long as someone is willing to ask a question, then they're permitted to answer one. Chris then said this: I'm always fascinated by how many right answers emerge from a given question. This taught me that it's the act of looking within for essential questions that drives the Question Bridge process. I don't think that Answer Bridge as a process would have been as significant. So I ask that as we listen to Chris tonight, and then I ask PACH as it moves into its evening session, to consider the questions that each one of you have for someone from whom you feel different. Because as Chris has taught me, it just might be that inside those questions, not inside the answers, but inside those questions, we might find, define, and revision just what PACH is looking for, our common humanity. So please join me in welcoming ChrisJohnson.
Wow. It's always, of course, humbling to follow introductions of any kind. But first, let me say that I'm really honored to be here. I didn't really understand what PACH was, at its heart, until on lunch just now with Niobe. And it's a noble thing you're attempting to do, and it's really an honor for me to be here and maybe make a contribution to this process. So as Lisa said, I decided to call this piece Question Bridge, Creative Expression and Transformational Change. I decided to go with that title. But I debated that. I was concerned that that's a kind of ponderous title. Creative expression and transformational change. Is that a natural link? Do we really believe in that? Isn't it actually easier to imagine the notion that art is something that is valuable without being useful? Doesn't that ring true? Now, why does that ring true? Doesn't the couplet art and leisure and art and entertainment ring more true than art and meaning? Now, why is that? So I have a little premise I want to make before I get into Question Bridge, which I will do, but I want to set that up by trying to make a point about what art can be. Because in a postmodern era, it's very easy to be cynical about art, about the value of it. And the recent passing of Arthur C. Danto, who's my favorite philosopher of art, he made the point that you really have to build on the association between art and meaning, but when you do, you get into a troubled situation because you're using the art world as a frame of reference. And I can tell you as a teacher at an art school, the fickle fads and trends that art students are, and all of us in art culture are subject to, makes it really hard to own the essential value of being an artist, which came to me when I would ask my students, so what does this work mean to you? And they would act like I was asking them a trick question. It's supposed to mean something, So I created a course called Making Meanings. And I had to start by defining what a meaning is. Because certainly the effort that it takes to be an artist, particularly the kind of artist that I've evolved into at this point in my life, it takes a kind of audacity. It has to mean a lot to you, otherwise you wouldn't even start. And so I can tell you that in creating Question Bridge Black Males, we started with a really audacious idea, that it would be possible to change the way we collectively perceive black male consciousness. And I'd like to use this talk as a test to see whether or not that's even possible. I think, in fact, I know that it is. But in terms of establishing the connection between art and meaning, what I want to do is go to another one of my favorite philosophers, John Dewey, the pragmatist. So let's look at this quote. He says, "To emphasize what is aesthetic about an experience is not finally to emphasize what is apolitical or impractical or otherwise marginal about that experience. Rather, it is to emphasize in what ways that experience as aesthetic is a manifestation, a record, a celebration of the life of a civilization, a means of promoting its development. So you see what he's doing? He's saying art and experience are linked, and this is from his book, Art as Experience. And insofar as that aesthetic experience relates to the kinds of experiences had in general, in other words, we're talking about experience here, not a particular kind of experience, it is also the ultimate judgment upon the quality of a civilization. That's worth repeating, I think. That the translation of a human experience can be an ultimate judgment upon the quality of a civilization. And this is what I'm here to talk to you about how the transformation of an experience into a work of art can be transformational for our culture as a whole. Because there's a refrain that I got from the interview that Mark did with Pete Seeger, which echoes this, and that is, he says that participation in the arts can save the human race. So from Pete Seeger, you would expect that. I mean, he's a visionary person, but what does that really mean? How might this process of using art as a transformational device, how might that work? And this is a way to sort of set up what Question Bridge is about. But you have to begin by taking the notion of an experience seriously. You have to recognize that any experience is a mystery, any experience. Things that we take for granted as immediate and obvious actually have deep metaphysical implications embedded in it. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to give you an experience, and let's critique it. So here's an experience for you to deal with. So you're all having the experience of redness. So some of you know where I'm going with this, I'm sure. I mean, what could be more obvious and immediate than the experience of redness? You're all having that experience. So there's our common humanity demonstrated. But let's look at this, because we've known since Isaac Newton that the reason why this looks red is because it's rejecting all of its red wavelengths into your retinas. Okay? So you are defining it as red, but how does it define itself? Okay? It defines itself as everything but red, because it is rejecting all of the red wavelengths. Did everyone get that? That's really what's happening. So as Kant said, we don't really know what the thing unto itself is. So you have to begin by questioning something you take totally for granted, an experience, and recognizing that beneath that is a mystery. There's something almost magical about that. So every artist that I know starts with this idea of, I have an experience. And for lots of complicated reasons, I need to translate that experience. Now we're talking about any art form, poetry, sculpture, dance. I need to translate that experience into something that I can maybe first mirror back to myself so that I can better understand myself. I had this experience that's profound and confusing. I want to reflect it in some way back to myself, so I have to manifest it. I have to go from something that's inchoate into something that's concrete, right? So maybe I understand my own inner life a little better, but then I want to share it with you. Do you see what a profound transformation that is? So if you go through this, if you have experiences that are meaningful enough to you to try to mirror it back to yourself and then share with the world, you are an artist. Let me give you an example of how that same kind of search for something that embodies an underlying reality takes the form of, as Lisa said, one of my mentors was a man named Win Bullock. So here's a photograph of his that's based on his attempt to try to reflect in his work the underlying reality of a piece of wood. This is just a piece of wood printed as a negative image, because he thought that might reflect more on its existence unto itself as opposed to its reality as we perceive it. So that's just a simple example of how this process can work. I think this is an extraordinary photograph. It's just a piece of wood printed in its negative, all right? All right. So what do you do if what you experience is injustice? what do you do with that experience? I mean, how do you use that experience as a basis for building tools to try to produce social and political and transformational and structural change? I mean, what do you do? Well, this is what I'm going to try to explain, and I've laid out a simple little set of guidelines that I, as part of a genre called engaged artists. There are a lot of us, okay? There are things that we do to try to take an experience of injustice and then use it as the starting point for works of art that hopefully are transformational. So the first thing you have to do is you have to understand what elements of this injustice, whatever it is, are reflected in values that are shared by the greatest number of people. In other words, you have to say, aside from ideology and abstract principles, what is the essence and core of this problem? You have to understand that intimately before you can go on to the next step. Then you have to decide what metaphors or examples can I use that might work in aesthetic terms to try to create a new methodology out of this. You have to understand the problem. You have to recognize that there's a part of it. I'm a video artist and photographer, so what part of it can I see? That's an example of that second step. What can I use to work with in aesthetic terms to try to make something out of this experience? Then you have to find a way to translate the problem into a metaphor that people will pay attention to. Because if your intention is to be impactful, it's not going to work if your process stays in the studio. You have to figure out a way how to embody this experience in a form that people outside of the experience will identify with. And I'm putting emphasis on the word embody because one of the strategies that people who practice in this way use is to literally take the injustice, impose it on a body, create a spectacle that is large enough for people to pay attention to, and then the media will come, okay, and they will see the injustice embodied. They will care about it in a way that they didn't before. That's a strategy. You see where I'm going with this, right? And then finally, you have to craft a narrative that itself summarizes the meaning that you want your work to convey. You have to start with an inner sense of how this injustice should be corrected, how is it embedded within narratives that we can critique and work with, and then how can I cause my audience to end in a place that is more progressive, that is more creative, that is more open. So those are the elements that are involved with that. And framed that way, can you see how it applies to this? Right? Gandhi's Salt March. The injustice, I think, is pretty obvious. He was working against the Raj. Okay? The metaphor that he used is, I'm entitled to make my own salt, aren't I? Okay? The strategy that he used was he staged a march across India to the ocean. The media had to come and pay attention to it, right? And he made, I can make my own salt. I don't need to buy your salt. Do you see? So I think this may seem like a stretch, but I'm trying to make the point that Gandhi was a performance artist. These things are done strategically, and they are transformational. So now I challenge you to think of a major social upheaval that didn't begin with an act like this. I mean, we have recent examples of people with graffiti in Tunisia, self-immolations, okay, or acts like this, right? Do you see? There's a framing device that's involved. Casting is a big part of it. The intervals that you work with, it has to be thought about strategically, artistically, aesthetically. It has to work. I mean, this photograph didn't just happen. And this process didn't just unfold. People thought about it very deeply. So hopefully I've made a point okay, about how this process can work. But I want to demonstrate how this process worked for me. So I need to go back and try to talk about like what was the generative experience that motivated this. And I want to use a slide by one of my favorite artists, Roy DeCarava, to demonstrate the way Brooklyn, because I'm from Bed-Stuy, the way it felt to me was like this. Now this is actually done in Harlem. I'm pretty sure this is a picture. I'm checking with my archivist. I think so. But it was a community in the early 60s where the classes were forced to live together by covenants, red lines, okay? And so I grew up in a place where it wouldn't have been unlikely to have mothers walking their children to school. There was crime, there was poverty, of course. There was violence, of course. But I grew up with doctors and lawyers who were in my immediate community. Within my immediate community, there were people who could afford nice furniture, so there were furniture stores owned by white businesses. And then, as soon as the civil rights legislation passed in the mid-60s, there was a vision that I could leave. And those who, of course, now the civil rights, the fair housing law didn't pass until '68, and I was already in California. But as soon as it was possible for those who had the means, African Americans, to leave, they did. And so I saw this sudden transformation, a rupture emerge. And so the image that we have of inner city lives is a concentration of poverty and a sense of despair that I didn't experience. That's not the Bed-Stuy that I knew. And so that rupture, I want you to keep that in mind. That was a formative experience for me. And you'll see that experience reflected in the way Question Bridge came to be. But since Question Bridge is a collaboration, Question Bridge, well, you'll see, it's complex. Question Bridge, as Lisa said, was a project that I created by myself using the black community in San Diego as the model in 1996. But that project worked extremely well, and I'll be showing you more about it. But then Hank Willis Thomas, who was a graduate student of mine, saw that project in 2007 and thought that it might make a good project. So he convinced me to take the broad notion of Question Bridge that I applied to the black community as a whole and apply it specifically to black males. So I want to say a little bit about his work, because if you don't know his work is motivated by an experience, the experience of his beloved cousin Sangha being murdered as a bystander to someone trying to steal a gold chain from somebody else. And so Hank's work is about the effect of the commodification of blackness and what it does to the black community, as I think this image vividly demonstrates. It's from his project called Branded. The other collaborator was another graduate student of mine, Baite Ross Smith, whose work deals with code switching. The fact that you can't locate who you are in one fixed set of lifestyle choices, that you have to change the way you behave and the way you move. Now these are human values, but these are things that are personified very strongly in the black male community, because you can't play hip hop with your white friends, for example. So that's an example of the kind of work that Baite does. Another collaborator is Kamal Sinclair, who came in as a business manager, but actually she is a playwright and a dancer. She, together with Dr. Joy DeGruy, who you may know from the work on the traumatic slave syndrome, she did that formative sociological work. And she and Kamal did a play based on post-traumatic slave syndrome, and she came on as a collaborator, and she actually, together with Joy DeGruy, created the curriculum, which I'll be talking to you more about. Let me show you some of my work, some of my earlier work. This is an example of work that I did in Africa. My work is very personal. It still is. This is a woman who just became my wife, actually. This is a project that I did on my mother. It's a triptych, and I'll show you the individual panels. So this was done in summer of 1974, and it says, after years of painful distance between us, she cried when Yosemite came into view. She reluctantly agreed when I asked her to pose in front of a burnt tree. This was summer 1980. When her hair grew back after chemotherapy, we were surprised at how soft it felt. I had to carry her down the stairs for my sister's wedding. We had never seen fear in her eyes before. And this is a few months later, winter 1980. A month before she died, she looked at me. We knew we were seeing each other for the last time. So these are examples of my personal work. And one more piece I want to show you. It's a triptych that's been published. It's a reenactment of a child abuse incident that happened between myself and my mother, which gives you an example of why my work with my mother is so fraught. So here's the left panel, which is kind of a collage of a family group. The reason it's collaged around a pile of matches because she was punishing me for experimenting with matches. And the figures from my family are printed to scale of their importance, which is why my father was so small and my grandmother is so large. And this is a pretty literal reenactment of what happened, except for the gag. That would have spoiled the composition. And this is a cloud of words that she wrote in a journal that I gave her when she was in the hospice. That's sort of edited into a narrative that expresses how much she loved us. Because that was the thing for me to learn from this process. That is that I couldn't be the person I am without having had a loving mother. So that gives you an example of the work that happened, that I did, and I consider that to be the whole of my career, in addition to being an educator and other things, as Lisa mentioned. And then I met this woman, who is Suzanne Lacey. Suzanne Lacey is a renowned performance artist, feminist scholar, who came to my school as a dean, and she decided that she needed to uncover the issues that are embedded in the California College, it was called, of Arts and Crafts at that point. We decided to try to get at what's going on in the inner lives of inner city kids, and so we created a project called The Roof is on Fire, where we put kids in cars on a rooftop in downtown Oakland, and we put badges around their neck that said, "Shut up and listen." And that was a message to the mainly white audience who came and eavesdropped on them while they were in the cars, and they just talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. It was a really profound experience for them to be entitled to talk, and it was really important for the audience to listen. So this is a key. And I use this slide because it shows that there's a problem in this really successful project. Because this woman that you see there is listening to black kids that she would otherwise, other than this performance strategy that Suzanne and I created, she wouldn't be there listening. But she's being generous in a passive way. Listening is an act of generosity, but it's a passive form of being generous. And you can see a little bit of frustration in her face in this slide. But the kids just kept talking, and they had a wonderful time. So then, a few years after this, the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego asked me to come down in 1996 because the Republican convention was happening in San Diego there, and they wanted to create a faux newsroom to stir things up. They said, "Please come and do something in video." I said, "Video? I don't work in video." So I had to come up with something. And I went back to that formative experience of the community dividing, and I realized that one thing that I have deep in my heart is an awareness of how the black community that nominally belongs to itself is really divided by a fissure of class and education, and those who chose to stay for lots of reasons in a community and those who chose to move away. That division is a really painful one for both sides, and that there are wisdoms and meanings on both sides. We were talking about this earlier, that is there as a resource that both could use if we could figure out how to make it work. So I decided to create a process that was one of active generosity, because if listening is an act of passive generosity, asking a question is a very active way to be generous, because if I ask a question that's sincere, then I am setting myself up to listen. But I'm also saying a lot about my own inner life. So I realized, and of course Socrates was way ahead of this, but the point is that if I use questions in a mediated way, I maybe could get people who have a deep investment in building a healthy, greater Black community to really share meanings with each other. So all I did was go to people who lived in the inner city neighborhoods of San Diego and say, I know you have a question for these people who live out in the suburbs. Will you let this project be the vehicle for taking that question out there, and I'll get you an answer to that question. So, and then I did the same thing in reverse. So here's a quick summary of what happened. This is from Question Bridge version 1, 1996.
Have you given any thought to where the money comes from for people who are receiving public assistance? And do you care?
I thought about where public assistance money comes from, and I do care, but for one, I am on public assistance. And it's not because we don't want to work. It's not because we want to sit at home and get a check or anything like that. A lot of people perceive us young teenage mothers to sit at home and just collect a check, where a lot of times we do go out and look for work. We do work. We can't work as long because childcare is really up there. At this point in time, I pay $300 a month for one child, and I have two. And I pay $158 a month for another child. The $300 is because my child is under 2. The $150 is because my child is over 2 and is school age. So yes, I know where the money comes from taxpayers. But we do have people who take up American jobs who are not taxpayers because they're not an American citizen. How about that? We get decreases in our checks because we're American citizens, but yet if you're a refugee or you're an immigrant or you're able working alien, legal working alien in the United States, you get an increase in your check when you come over here from different countries, because the United States government have so-called some kind of agreement with them. They come over here and they're able to get grants to start businesses where we are already living here, working, doing the backbone of the country, and we don't get that same type of respect. But yet people look down upon us because we are on public assistance. They like to say, oh, the Black teenage moms are going out, opening their legs and having babies just to get on welfare to get out the house. That is not always the case. It's a small proportion that does that, but you only focus on the small proportion.
So you can imagine me behind the camera thinking, this thing is working. She had a lot to say. Where did that come from? And so Question Bridge version 1 was an hour long of really powerful discourse between these two groups of people. And I thought that maybe something is working here. So what I want to do is show you what the basis in methodology was for Question Bridge Black males. I want to do a little thought experiment with you. This goes back to this idea is, can a strategically designed art piece that uses intuition and imagination as its source be transformational on deep personal and social societal levels? So imagine that you walk into a restaurant and you see this group of guys. Okay? So what is your first reaction to this group? Are you going to go over and talk to them? Probably not. I mean, actually, this is actually driven by an experience that I had when I was going for a run around Houston, and I came across a group of guys who were just standing around a truck talking, and I realized that I felt myself moving away from them. I was afraid of them. So all of your presumptions about Black male consciousness are embodied in whatever reaction you're having to this group of guys. So now I want you to imagine that I can wave a magic wand. This is the art part, okay? And I'm going to make you totally invisible. In fact, not even invisible, I'm going to make you completely undetectable. and make you about 4 inches tall and put you on the table in front of these guys. And you can just sit and listen to them talk. You with me? Now, you know in that setting, because you are in a zone of no consequences, that you're going to hear that they're talking about the basketball game, their fathers, you're going to come away with a really different experience of black male consciousness because they opened up. Not to you, they didn't know you were there, but they opened up and you have insight into their consciousness that you didn't have before. So that is the basic model of Question Bridge. It gives you a window because you get to be a part from what is a very intimate and powerful conversation based on questions that go back and forth. So here's 2 minutes of Question Bridge Black Males, and I have some more to show you as well. But here's an introduction to it.
Black man, do you want to get out of the situation that you're in?
What is the reluctance of taking responsibility for improving our communities?
Are your children better or worse off as a result of your involvement?
Why wouldn't you be happy with accepting a game?
Why are you so violent?
Why do you have that take mentality?
Why are you afraid of being intelligent?
Why?
Why? What I want to know is
Why?
I believe that we've incorporated a lot of things that are unhealthy to us.
We are supposed to be tough,
I can't let them see no type of sucker.
along with various other stereotypes.
The level of mentorship in our community is not as strong as it possibly could be.
When I came up, crack was a quick way for a black man to make $1 million.
Sometimes I think because we think we're black, we're some other kind of human beings, but we're just like most other human beings.
Why didn't y'all leave us the blueprint?
We did leave you a blueprint.
We just didn't tell you where it was.
That's something that we dropped the ball on.
what do you fear?
That something will harm your children. I fear success.
Am I the only one who has problem eating chicken, watermelon, and bananas in front of white people?
That word, we have to stop using it.
I think black women can say nigga anytime they want.
How dare you? What right do you have to use this word?
A lot of nigga questions for the rapper.
What is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
This is the easiest question in the world to answer.
The thing that we have in common is that we are male and we are black.
My question is, I try to live good, but I'm surrounded by bad. And I want to know what it is I could do to do better and live peaceful, surrounded by all evil. How can I do that?
We spent 4 years traveling around. We never told these men what to ask. All we said was, this is a chance for you to address a question that you have to another black man who you feel different from. And then we played those questions for people who could answer. So you could see this incredible richness that is, what? Black males. I mean, the whole point of the way we do this is that, there are some celebrities mixed in, but the whole point is to make it clear to anybody who sees this project that you can walk out in the street and touch any black man. And if you approach them in the right way, what you would find is not only all of the deep concerns and problems that are embedded in the black family, but you'd find the answers too. That's the point. So the methodology, as I showed you, let me show you one sort of concise example of the way this worked.
My question to the black man in America or anywhere else is, what is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
Our commonality is in our history, but I think our beauty as black people is also in our diversity.
See how it works? Those men never saw each other. And so there's me behind the camera. We went around. We went to 12 different cities over 4 years. That's Baite doing the audio. We built impromptu studios around any black man we could find. One thing I can tell you is that we spent 4 years, we never encountered a black man who said no. Every single one had, oh yeah, I've got a question. There's Hank at the keyboard choosing a question to direct at this man. So that's the way it worked. It's a very deceptively simple methodology. Here's another example. And this is important because Niobe and I were talking. This is what I was describing. Because one thing about this methodology is that because of the way it's structured, to bring to the surface these questions and answers, we never got to see the way people who asked the question responded to the answer. So here's an encounter that actually got closed 2 weeks ago when I was in Birmingham.
You know, I wonder, black man, are you really ready for freedom? And if not, what would it take for you to want and need this freedom?
This is a guard in the library. That was his question.
Am I ready for freedom? And what would it take for me to want that freedom? First, I would have to stop and ask myself, and that's a tough question. Because freedom to me is a mind state. You know, because you got some people that's not in jail, that's not free. You know, you got people that's in prison in dysfunctional relationships. You got people that's in prison with jobs, they work 9 to 5 that they don't like. Some people are in prison with alcohol and drug abuse. So I would have to really ask myself what's in prison in me. And what's been in prison in me is my self-esteem, my lack of self-esteem. My lack of self-esteem has led me to commit crime, to hurt people, to manipulate people, right? Because if I love myself, there's no way I could walk outside this room and punch somebody if I'm esteemed within myself. So to be free to me would have to be, I would have to change, you know? So in order for me to grow, I'd have to change because if change is necessary for growth. In order for me to grow, I would have to adapt the mentality that something's got to change in me. I have to change my mind state. I'd have to change the way I talk. I have to change the people I interact with. That would be free.
Could you hear that? Oh, good. I mean, I teach meditation in prison, so they allowed me to come in and bring my crew and get that answer to his question. So what happened in Birmingham is that Birmingham is where we started. That first question was from our first filming, and Tony was in the audience. And so I said, Tony, here's the answer to your question. And so we sat on stage just like this, and I watched Tony standing right there looking up at Ivan in prison answering his question. And he was stunned. So I said, so Tony, what do you think about the answer to your question? He said, that's exactly what I would have said. So this started out as a very modest project. We framed it as if it was going to be a PBS documentary. It ended up becoming something that we discovered as a transmedia piece that needed to exist on multiple platforms. By its very nature, the content needs to be formatted in such a way that people can see it in an installation. We've built a website and a mobile app so that it can actually be shared with the world. As I mentioned, we created a curriculum, which I'll be telling you a little bit more about later, because the people who really need to know what these black men have to say, both questions and answers, are children who don't have fathers and grandfathers in their homes. And we do community events, because you saw that question. The question was, why didn't you leave us a blueprint? That made me think, there are elders, people who are activists in communities who think that they're building a blueprint. Why don't the younger generations feel that? So why don't we organize public events around that question? And so that's how the project kind of grew. As Lisa mentioned, it played for 6 months at the Oakland Museum and the Brooklyn Museum as a 3-hour installation piece. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival last year at the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art and in Atlanta. It's been in 20 different venues. It's still traveling. It kind of runs my life at this point, which is okay. This is the way the installation looked at the Brooklyn Museum. There are lots of different visual elements of it. Remember I said the visual elements, the aesthetics are really important. So the lighting and the framing and the backgrounds. I mean, you have to take the metaphor that you're using, that you want to be transformational, and make it aesthetically impactful. So it has to work as a work of art. We had, as you can imagine, this is from the opening at the Brooklyn Museum. We had more black folks in the Brooklyn Museum than have ever been there. So I think I'm running out of time. 5 minutes. Okay, so I want to show you some clips. This is a good one. Okay.
This may seem like a silly question, but I want to know, am I the only one who has problem eating chicken, watermelon, and bananas in front of white people?
I don't have a problem with it, period.
No, to be honest with you, I don't even eat watermelon because of the connotations that it has around black people. But I will eat some chicken though.
I never heard of bananas. Bananas, really?
I don't know if you're the only one, but it's not a problem for me to eat whatever I want to eat from anybody.
You're not the only one, brother, to be honest. Every time I still eat chicken, I eat a lot of watermelon, and I love bananas. But I'm always looking over my shoulder, wherever I'm at, seeing who's watching me eat this watermelon and this piece of chicken and this banana. Always. You're not the only one.
No, I know plenty of African Americans who, as a rule, will not eat watermelon in front of white folks. Now, for me, I have difficulty relating to the question only in the sense that I've never ever liked watermelon and I don't eat meat. So I don't find myself in a situation where chicken and watermelon comes to a head. But I do know that there are times where you feel like you are the stereotype because, if they say, hey, do you want to go play some basketball? And of course I love basketball. I played it every single day. But there's a part of me that wants to say, no, I don't want to play basketball. What makes you think I want to play basketball? But in those moments, I think we have to be honest with ourselves and just know that there are some things that are true. Yes, we like chicken, we like watermelon, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's nothing to be ashamed of.
It's not a silly question, brother. My family sells 50,000 pounds of watermelons every week in the streets of South Chicago, Milwaukee, and Gary, Indiana, and have been since 1953. And we're okay with that. And by the way, I like fried chicken. In fact, I'm gonna make some tonight.
I don't know if you're the only one ashamed. I'm not ashamed, but I do give chicken a second thought sometimes, even when I mention it. But I always pass it off as sort of like in a jokey joke way, because I do love chicken. Watermelon, I don't eat watermelon so much, so I'm not really so much ashamed of it. Bananas, I hadn't thought about bananas because I always think about a banana because I'm gay in a sexual way. So when I put a banana, I'm always self-conscious in front of anybody just because sexuality, but not because of race.
I think really that question leads to a deeper question. Why are we so concerned with what they think about us? That's what the real question is. I don't really care. I know somewhere in there I do care, but in my consciousness and what I'm going to say is I don't really care what they think. I don't need their approval in order for me to go ahead and be me, or in order for me to do my job, or in order for me to be who I'm going to be. I don't need their approval. I don't need their job. None of that. I think it's really important that we stop worrying about what they think and start worrying about what you think about yourself and maybe what the little black kid next door to you thinks about you. Fuck some white person thinking what they think about you eating a watermelon or anything else, your shoes, your jacket, your hat backwards. I don't go with the sagging pants, but, whatever you're doing, it's because it's your cultural identity or your food or whatever. What they think about is not really important.
So you can see all of the elements there that I described in that list. You can see how we're using a choreography of monitors to keep your interest in these talking heads. You can see the narrative arc It's not an accident that we end with that man, because there's a meaning that we're trying to convey, a value we're trying to convey. But it has a claim to being true, doesn't it? Because it feels like it's spontaneous and documentary. So you see, it's a trick. It's art. So I think I should close. So these are just other ways that the project is represented, the website. The curriculum, I want to stop for just one moment and say that the curriculum is the way that this project can really have an ongoing life. Because if the key themes, identity, representation, all those core issues that the project in its fullness represents are distilled down into modules that can be given to educators, then those educators can use it in classrooms to talk to their children, get conversations going. Getting black men up on a screen talking about things that feel controversial gives permission for the conversation to happen. It's a powerful curricular vehicle. There's a pedagogy that we're building around this that we believe in, and so we've created something called the Question Bridge Education Initiative that is fundraising and trying to propagate the curriculum. So I just wanted to close there. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, thank you. Very beautiful project.
Thank you.
I was exploring it on the internet earlier, so thank you. I was wondering about just a quick methods question. Did any of the men see responses to the questions that they were posed? And they didn't see that until if they've looked at the transmedia.
Yeah, that's why the website is so important, because it gives us a chance to close the loop. That's why I'm so glad that I was in Birmingham to be able to give you one concrete example of how that can happen. People ask me who the audience for this is. Well, there really are three audiences. And I think of it in concentric circles. The immediate audience is the person who asked the question is an audience for the answer. That's the inner heart of it. On the other hand, the range of black men that exist in this project is so vast that the black male community as a whole will always find itself able to identify with something in the project. So I think of the black male community as being like the second concentric circle, who is a prime audience for this project. But then if you happen not to be a black man, being a privileged witness to this conversation, like that person on the table, so those are the audiences that I think. But we haven't had a chance, other than few rare examples, to close the loop. Yeah.
Going back to the Pete Seeger quote, participation in art can save the human race. The premise of that is that art is important to the human race. And so I wonder how you would address, is art important enough in our society that stuff like this could actually have an impact?
Well, I have to say that we like to validate the word culture, like this is our culture. But when you think about what you mean, like what is a cultural artifact? Usually people are thinking about things that are in museums. So the things that define the identity of any collective group of people are art forms in one way or another. So there's a reflection in art of something that's essential to any group of people. But you've seen me demonstrate, I hope, that art can be transformative, because when we did this, I didn't know whether people were going to care about seeing black men. But what I discovered is that the project has become vastly popular. I mean, like I said, it's going to be at the Corcoran on December 7th. It's traveling around. So there is some resonance. I do believe that, as I said, that that the locus for transformational change is the human heart. Any real change begins with a person exercising free will, agency. And I think that is what art speaks to and reflects.
You just touched on this, but I'll ask you to be more specific about it. So in your theory of change earlier, when you were talking about how art can be a vehicle for social transformation, you talked about needing to pitch or play the art toward a widely shared value. What's the widely shared value you think that a focus on black males is playing to?
I think that we're using black men. Black men in our culture are probably one of the most opaque demographics that there is. There's a play on words there that I didn't really intend. But the idea is that black men have a persona that is tough and uncommunicative and angry. If you can discover vulnerability, openness, honesty, spontaneous wisdom in black men, then you're likely to believe that it applies to anybody. And so we're using black men as an example of a process that could be done with anybody. The project is called Question Bridge: Black Males. That colon is really active in this. It could be Question Bridge: fill in the blank. And so I really believe that the values in this case have to do with what happens when you give any human being an opportunity to really freely express themselves. There's another project that I wanted to do called You Are Your Question, which is based on the assumption that all of our lives, that the arc of all of our lives is based upon our effort to try to resolve what for us is a core question. A person is lucky if they have maybe 2 questions in their lives that they flesh out. So this project is an attempt to try to demonstrate that with a kind of broad sampling of the most obdurate demographic people can think of, opening their hearts.
Great project. I have a lot of questions. I think I'll limit myself to 2 for right now. The first is I really appreciate the simplicity of having black males respond to black males. But just wondering, did you ever think about adding in another layer, potentially having black women chime in, for instance, or white men chime in about how they feel when they see a black man eat a piece of chicken or something to that effect?
To be honest, I made a kind of conceptual commitment to only doing question bridge projects within demographics, not between them. And I did that because I really feel as if you can see very familiar human dynamics more clearly when you dispense with the categories that you think divide people. If you do them within a demographic and you see racism, you have to think about how could black people be racist? So you don't think about it the same way if you do it within a demographic. And so that isn't to say that there isn't merit to a question bridge cross, but I'm really interested in isolating these values as they appear within groups that nominally belong to each other.
And second question, I'm excited to dive in on the website and see what you have to offer there. I'm wondering, did the project end the day you stopped filming, or can black men, Skype in now and add their recordings and continue the conversation?
Yeah, so now I get to pull up my mobile app. And I could show you that we have a mobile app that not only gives you a chance to see a person enact the question, you can see an array of answers, and then there's a respond button that uses your in-camera phone. And so the idea is that this could become, we're working on that.
Is that material curated somehow, or is it just kind of you filter it on your own?
It's both. We're going to make sure that the strongest core questions and answers are there to demonstrate the integrity of the project, but then it becomes an open process, an open source opportunity for black males or non-black males, but you have to identify yourself as a way into the project.
First, I just want to thank you for taking this on as the mother of 4 black males and plenty of others in my family. I think it's so important. I have 2 questions. One, when you framed this, which I found the way you framed it to be really profound for me, it just impacted me very profoundly. But you mentioned that you ask them to talk about others that they feel are different. And I sort of couldn't tell from the clip that you showed what kinds of questions were asked to kind of the other. So I'd love to hear your response to that, how you think about that. That's my first question. And then my second question really has to do with how you use this in community sort of settings. What kind of dialogue does it produce within communities? whether it would be something that you would do in schools to help think about sort of achievement issues and things like that.
When you think about the way the project would have been different, if we had used as the core question, ask a question of a man that you admire. You would have gotten, you can imagine how kind of predictable that would be. But framing it so that people are asking questions of a black man that they feel very different from gave them a chance to try to sort within themselves how they feel different within a demographic that's supposed to be unified. Do you see what that does? And so then a man who is in the example that I showed, a man who is wondering in his own heart why he's not more free, asks a question of a man who is incarcerated. Do you see how that works? And then his answer informs him. And so when you get people to think about within themselves how they differ, what divides them from themselves, in the form of a question, and you put that out there, what you get is a spectrum of answers. And that's something that we discovered. We discovered that you get poignant question, answer, 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 answer. All the answers are different. So they don't really constellate around any specific right answer. But the fact that there are so many different questions, so many different answers to those questions is itself really revealing. And so I think that it does speak to both difference and commonality at the core human level. And how we use it, we really intend for it to be a classroom tool, we really do. I've done 6 public events where in public we bring young black men together with elders on stage. I call them blueprint roundtables, where the people who think that they're offering a blueprint get to speak to these young men on stage. It's a very powerful event. There are many of them that are online that you can see. A good example of just how innocent a question can be, but so important, is one young man used it as an opportunity to ask of an elder on stage, how do you tie a tie? And how do I learn how to do that? So you can then imagine what it will be like when the curriculum gets a chance to be in every school in the country.
Thank you.
Hi, I want to first thank you for introducing me to passive generosity. I think it's something that I'm going to tune into whenever I'm actually tuned out. My question is more about your experience and what you might have learned from the process of selection and the process of pairing the various people that you had. Can you give us maybe an anecdote or two of something that was totally surprising to you about your own reaction to people when you were selecting them to join?
Yeah, I have to be honest, and this is where there's a deep answer to that question, which has to do with the fact that when I left Bed-Stuy in '67 or whenever that was, and came to California, became a kind of hippie and got involved with the art community and found myself surrounded by white people everywhere, but who saw me as an artist and person and whatever. This project brought me back into the black community in a way that was unexpected to me as a whole. I didn't go into it assuming that they would even recognize me as a black person. That's the honest answer to your question. And so, but they did, and it worked fine. And so I learned a lot about myself in the process. And I think it's not an accident that I ended up marrying a black woman.
Thank you for this. I don't say this lightly. This is brilliant. And anyone who knows me, I kept out the F word, which is rare for me. So thank you. It's purely a selfish question. I'm a military veteran using the arts to help veterans. So how do I work with you to do the Question Bridge veterans? And also my wife and I work with 2 Native American theater companies for the last 12 years in LA and Toronto. How do we work with you on Question Bridge Native American?
Yeah. Great question. I really consider this to be an open source gift to the world. And one question bridge that I would love to do is Question Bridge Native Americans. I mean, I live in California where there's a real sense of being on land that is a violation of traditional rights. But I recognize from having done this project that it would be maybe conceptually impossible for me to get the kind of mirroring and intimacy within the community if I were there and not a Native American person myself. So I think you have to do it with your, as a veteran.
In touch with Randy Reinholds, who runs Native Voices in Los Angeles. And
Great.
He'll love this.
Great. We discovered very early on that even though we had Kamal as one of our key collaborators, she couldn't be in the room when you have to create a space that's safe. Thank you very much.